Good afternoon, everybody. We will continue this discussion that we had a few days ago regarding pharmacology of heart failure. So, in that class, the basic discussion was more on the physiological aspects related to the heart failure, and we end up discussing the pathophysiology of heart failure. And at the end, we discussed what should be the therapeutic strategies related to the treatment of heart failure. Now, I will continue our discussion in the today's class from where we had left on that day. So, if you see the vicious circle or vicious cycle that develops in consequence to the reduced cardiac output, you will see that various events usually happens in consequence to that one particular event of reduced cardiac output. Now, the events that happens broadly, we can see those events from three perspectives or three views. Now, when there is a reduced cardiac output, heart itself tries to compensate for that reduced cardiac output. And we were discussing about the Frank Sterling mechanism. Now, wherein we were seeing that if there is a reduced cardiac output, then in consequence to that, ultimately there is increased in systolic volume, and then the increased in diastolic volume is there, and subsequently in response to the in diastolic volume, heart also increases the stroke volume, but it leads to dilated heart, and this dilated heart till a point wherein it is compensating for the reduced cardiac output, the heart will be in the compensated state. So till that point we will call it as the compensated heart failure. But if it goes and goes on for a very longer period, ultimately it will lead to myocardial remodeling in consequence to these events happening for a longer period, because in consequence to the reduced cardiac output there are other mechanisms that also get activated. For example, there will be increased sympathetic activity. So these increased sympathetic activity, initially it will try to maintain the cardiac contractility, and also there will be renin-angiotensin aldosterone system activation that will try to maintain the arterial pressure and try to maintain the perfusion to the vital organ. But if there is increased sympathetic activity, increased renin-angiotensin aldosterone activity, ultimately these effects will lead to vasoconstriction, and also uh, sodium and water retention will be there. So all these effects will increase the preload, will increase the afterload, will increase to edema, and also if these compensatory mechanisms, if they remain activated for a longer period, consequently a point will come wherein the heart will be remodeled, and this remodeled heart will not be able to pump up the blood efficiently. So the vicious circle from where it started from the reduced cardiac output, but it has again come to a same point wherein the heart is not able to pump the blood efficiently. So as I was telling you, we need to break this cycle at certain point or at somewhere, so that this vicious cycle is stopped. So these compensatory mechanisms that gets activated initially, these are helpful. These are basically trying to maintain the cardiac output. But if they remain activated for a longer period, for a very chronic period, then these effects will lead to various unwanted effects that we don't want. For example, in consequence to the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system activation, there is vasoconstriction apart from the vasoconstriction that is happening because of the sympathetic stimulation. So these vasoconstriction, initially it is trying to maintain the blood pressure, and the purpose is to maintain the perfusion to the vital organs. But if this vasoconstriction is sustained for a very longer period, what it will do, it will lead to excessive afterload, and ultimately it will increase the cardiac energy expenditure. Similarly, the salt and water retention, initially it will increase the preload and will try to maintain the cardiac output, but for a longer period, if it remains as such, it will lead to pulmonary congestion or anasarca. So as we have discussed in the previous lecture, the therapeutic strategies, either you increase the force of contraction by using cardiac glycosides or certain other drugs, but the drugs which basically only increases the force of contraction, these will provide symptomatic relief only. Heart failure is a progressive disease, and the purpose is not only to provide the symptomatic relief, but also you have to halt the progression of the disease. So another drug which only provides to extent only symptomatic relief are diuretics. I'm not talking about the aldosterone antagonist. Aldosterone antagonist provide symptomatic relief as well as they halt the progression of the disease. But diuretics such as loop diuretics, they basically reduces the plasma volume, reduces the congestion and edema, reduces the fluid retention, reduces the preload. But basic purpose of diuretics are to provide the symptomatic relief to the patient. They do not halt the progression of the disease. Then the other categories of drug we were talking about, constantly we are talking about the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, and we are talking about sympathetic overstimulation. Now we can target the sympathetic overstimulation by using drug such as beta blocker. Now beta blocker is one interesting case as far as heart failure is concerned. Beta blockers are both indicated and contraindicated in heart failure, because beta blocker, if you use beta blocker in decompensated heart failure, it will cut down whatever sympathetic support that the heart is getting, and it will be detrimental in the decompensated heart failure. But in chronic stable heart failure or in a compensated heart failure, beta blocker can be helpful, because beta blocker will reduce the sympathetic overstimulation, which can be problematic if it remains activated for a longer period, because the chronic sympathetic stimulation will ultimately lead to a point wherein the heart will be remodeled. So you are basically halting that process by using beta blocker. So that's why we call that beta blocker is both indicated as well as contraindicated in heart failure, contraindicated in decompensated heart failure. Okay, or in severe heart failure, we don't use beta blocker, but in mild cases or in stable cases or in compensated heart failure, we can use beta blockers. Now, the other class that we are talking about is the class of drug which targets renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. In this, we can use drugs such as ACE inhibitors, we can use angiotensin receptor blockers, or we can use aldosterone antagonists. And if you see, or if we talk about ACE inhibitors or ARBs, these are the drugs which not only reduces the preload, but they also reduces the afterload. And these drugs will also reduce the production of aldosterone, and that these are the important mechanisms that makes AC inhibitors a first line drug for the treatment of heart failure, or a preferred drug for the treatment of heart failure. So you can put ACE inhibitors or ARBs in a categories of drug which are vasodilators, or you can separately discuss in context of heart failure, you can separately discuss ACE inhibitors or ARBs as a drug which reduces or which targets the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. Then the fourth category of drug that briefly we have discussed about ACE inhibitors. ACE inhibitors are also vasodilators. There are other directly acting vasodilators such as nitrates. Other day we were discussing about nitrates. So nitrates basically primarily they decreases preload. And then we have the other vasodilators such as hydralazine, which decreases afterload. Then the other action of nitrate to an extent can also decrease the afterload. Then there are other categories of drug which decreases both preload and afterload. AC inhibitors or ARBs are the classical example of drug which reduces both preload as well as afterload. Now let us start discussing classes of drug and how they are useful in the treatment of heart failure with reference to one analogy that we had discussed, the donkey analogy. Okay, and we had seen that, or rather I should say, we had compared the donkey with the heart, and there were certain factors. For example, preload was basically the load that the donkey was carrying in the cart. Then there was afterload. We had compared with the slope of the road that the donkey will be carrying the cart. Then we had seen the myocardial intrinsic health of the myocardium or the contractility of the heart, and we will see how each category of drug is helping this donkey or this heart in carrying the cart. So let us first pick up what we are seeing. We are seeing that diuretics are just reducing the number of sacks of the wagon, if I talk in the context of the donkey analogy, or simply diuretics are reducing the preload. Okay, so diuretics basically decreases the plasma volume and decreases the venous return to the heart. So they decreases the preload, and this decreases the cardiac workload and the oxygen demand, but they don't have any effect on the cardiac contractility. So now if I ask you which diuretics is most preferred or most commonly used in the treatment of heart failure? Yes? No, I am talking about diuretics. Which diuretics is most preferred in case of heart failure? You must have heard about loop diuretics, okay, such as furosemide. So loop diuretic is a very potent diuretic. We also call it as high ceiling diuretic, and it is very commonly used or preferred diuretics in the cases of heart failure, and it is used in patients who require extensive diuresis and the patients who are suffering from renal insufficiency also. So it basically leads to reduction in pulmonary congestion and severe edema associated with acute heart failure or moderate and severe chronic heart failure. Thiazide diuretics are not that commonly used in cases of heart failure. Thiazides are more preferred in cases of hypertension. Thiazides can be used only in cases of mild heart failure because thiazides are relatively mild diuretics and they lose their efficacy if the patient creatinine clearance is very less. Whereas the loop diuretic is even effective in patients who are suffering from renal insufficiency. Aldosterone antagonist we will discuss separately. So what we have noticed about diuresis is that they basically reduces the fluid volume, reduces the preload, and they provide symptomatic relief to the patient by reducing the pulmonary congestion or the peripheral edema, but they do not halt the progression of the disease. And as far as which diuretic is preferred in cases of heart failure, we have seen that loop diuretics or the high ceiling diuretics are the more preferred diuretic that is used. Now, if I ask you about the most common complication that you should be aware of while using diuretic, which is the most common adverse effect that you should be aware of or you should be cautious of? Yes, the electrolyte imbalances such as hypokalemia that it can lead to. And don't use very high doses of diuretics because of the various adverse effects associated with the diuretics, and it can lead to increased mortality. It is preferable to use low dose therapy of diuretics for a maintenance, and never use diuretic alone. The guideline says that diuretics should be administered along with preferably ACE inhibitors or other drugs. We have seen ACE inhibitors have got various effects as far as heart failure is concerned, whereas diuretics is more commonly used for giving symptomatic relief to the patient. It is not halting the progression of the disease. Now let us come to the second category of drugs, vasodilators. Now vasodilators relax and dilate the blood vessels, and there are certain vasodilator which decreases preload, there are certain vasodilator which decreases afterload, and there are certain vasodilators which decreases both preload and afterload, and they allow more efficient blood flow and usually increases the cardiac output. Now again, if I ask you to put or to discuss or to put the vasodilator in the context of the donkey analogy, how it will help the donkey in carrying the cart. Preload, we have seen diuretics are basically reducing the sacks or the number of sacks that the donkey needs to carry. So any vasodilator which decreases preload will do that one thing. Okay. Now any vasodilator that decreases afterload, decreasing the afterload means, in the context of the donkey analogy, what we have compared afterload as a slope of the road that the donkey has to carry the cart. Now if we decrease the afterload, it means we are reducing that angle in which that donkey has to carry the cart. So we are increasing the efficiency of the donkey. So this is how we can compare the role of vasodilators with the example of the donkey. Now broadly, we have three classes of vasodilators. One class of vasodilator which leads to dilation of venous blood vessels, leading to decrease in cardiac preload by increasing the venous capacitance. Then we have the second category of vasodilator which leads to arterial dilation and reducing the systemic arterial resistance and decreases the afterload. And the third category is the drug which reduces both preload and afterload. So AC inhibitors are the drugs, or ARBs are the drugs which reduces both preload and afterload. But you can not only put them strictly in the category of vasodilator, because they have got other actions also. Now, as far as examples of drugs that decrease preload, one drug that can be used in some cases of heart failure, particularly in severe heart failure, is isosorbate dinitrate. And we have discussed about isosorbate dinitrate in detail while we were discussing the anti-anginal drugs. So how they act, they basically increases the cyclic GMP in the venous blood vessels, leading to venodilation, and that's how they decreases the preload, and they also dilate the coronary arteries, and they have also got certain action on the afterload also, but their major action is on reducing the preload. So they can be used by IV route in severe heart failure. In some cases of severe heart failure, they can be used. Then the second category of drug which decreases the afterload, such as hydralazine. Hydralazine is a direct acting vasodilator which acts mainly on the arterial smooth muscle and decreases the peripheral vascular resistance. In some cases of heart failure, we can use combination of isosorbate dinitrate with hydralazine, particularly if patient is not tolerating the AC inhibitors or beta blockers, or you need additional vasodilator response. Then in those categories of patients, sometimes you might need a combination of hydralazine and isosorbate dinitrate. Then ACE inhibitors. ACE inhibitors, we can say, are the preferred drug or the drug of choice as far as heart failure is concerned. And because we have seen what is the basic mechanism of action of ACE inhibitors, they block the enzyme that converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Now we all know that angiotensin 2 is a very potent vasoconstrictor, and this formation of angiotensin 2 is basically halted by the ACE inhibitors. So if you halt the progression of angiotensin 2, it will increase the vasodilation of vascular smooth muscle. It will lead to reduction in sodium and water retention, because what is happening, if you halt the formation of angiotensin 2, ultimately there will be also decreased secretion of aldosterone. Now, so all these effects will lead to the reduced sodium and water retention, vasodilation of the smooth muscles. And also one thing that ACE inhibitors are doing, they are inhibiting the degradation of bradykinin. Bradykinin itself is a vasodilator. So overall, the effects of ACE inhibitors, they are reducing not only preload, they are also reducing the afterload, and also they are halting the progression of the disease, and they ultimately decreases both mortality and morbidity in the cases of heart failure. Now if I ask you how ACE inhibitors reduces afterload and how it reduces preload, tell me how ACE inhibitors reduces afterload. Because just now I was telling you, ACE inhibitors actually prevent the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is a very potent vasoconstrictor. So if you prevent the formation of angiotensin 2, naturally you can reduce the afterload. Now how ACE inhibitors are reducing the preload? Because what we have seen, aldosterone basically causes sodium and water retention, and this retention of sodium and water can increase the plasma volume. Okay, so because ACE inhibitors ultimately also prevent the formation of aldosterone, they can decrease the preload. Okay, so if you put it in the context of donkey analogy, it is reducing the number of sacs, it is decreasing the afterload. It means the slope is reducing. Okay, and also we have seen that if the compensatory mechanisms such as sympathetic stimulation or the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system remains activated for a very longer period, these effects can lead to cardiac hypertrophy and cardiac remodeling. So because you are inhibiting the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, you will ultimately inhibit the cardiac remodeling process. Okay, so this is how it provides, or it can halt the progression of the disease, that I am telling again and again. Okay, so these are the three broad mechanisms of action which are useful, or which makes AC inhibitors or ARBs a preferred drug in the treatment of heart failure. Have you understood? So one thing is there, that it do not have any direct positive inotropic action. In spite of that, it is a preferred drug in the cases of heart failure, because by decreasing the angiotensin 2 generation, it is decreasing the peripheral vascular resistance and decreasing the afterload. By decreasing the aldosterone secretion, it is decreasing the sodium and water retention and decreasing the blood volume, and decreases the preload. And also because it halt the compensatory mechanism that has been activated in response to the reduced cardiac output, it is reducing the cardiac remodeling process. So because of all these effects, it provides a very good effect as far as heart failure is concerned, which makes it among the first line drug for the treatment of heart failure. So in this context, I was talking about AC inhibitors and ARB. ARB do not cause cough, okay, whereas AC inhibitors can lead to cough. But both the drugs basically decreases the mortality and morbidity in cases of heart failure, due to all these phenomenon that we have discussed just now. Now, if you discuss in context of the Laplace law, this law basically tells that intraventricular pressure is equal to wall tension divided by ventricular radius. Now, drugs such as diuretics or AC inhibitors or ARBs, they reduces the ventricular radius, because they are basically reducing the preload apart from their other effect. So the cardiac size is basically decreasing. So what we have seen, intraventricular pressure is basically inversely proportional to the ventricular radius. So if you decrease the ventricular radius, the intraventricular pressure will be increasing. Aldosterone receptor antagonist, while we were discussing about AC inhibitors or ARBs, we have briefly discussed about this also. So aldosterone, actually in patients with the heart failure, there is elevated level of aldosterone due to angiotensin 2 stimulation. So if you halt the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, you can reduce the formation of aldosterone also. So this is how the ARBs such as spironolactone can be helpful in the treatment of heart failure. Now let us move on to the third category of drug, beta blockers. Now beta blockers, I have told you, is an interesting case as far as heart failure is concerned. It is both indication as well as contraindication for heart failure, because the simple logic is that why at all you will administer a drug with negative inotropic activity to a patient with heart failure? And this is what beta blocker is doing. So then what is the logic of administering beta blockers in the patients of heart failure? As I was telling you again and again that we have to target that vicious circle which is ultimately leading to the formation of, or which is ultimately leading to cardiac remodeling. Okay, so somewhere down the line you have to prevent that process, or which can lead to cardiac remodeling. And we have seen that sympathetic overstimulation for a chronic period usually lead to cardiac remodeling. So beta blocker is one drug which can halt, or which can prevent that sympathetic overstimulation, and that is how it is giving you some benefit in the cases of heart failure. So as you can see, beta blocker not only targets the sympathetic overstimulation, it also inhibits the formation of renin, and to an extent we can say that it also targets the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So everything actually, from reduced cardiac output, we are coming to a point wherein sympathetic overstimulation is there, wherein renin angiotensin aldosterone system activation is there. So beta blocker will provide you both the benefit. It can target both the mechanism. So beta blocker act by inhibiting the adverse effects of sympathetic nervous system overstimulation in patients with heart failure, and it also reduces the renin secretion by inhibiting the beta 1 adrenergic receptors located on the JG cells. And the basic thing that we are doing with beta blocker, we are preventing the cardiac remodeling process. So if I ask you to again compare the role of beta blocker in the context of donkey analogy, how beta blocker will help the donkey. So beta blocker is basically limiting the donkey's speed, okay, and it is basically telling the donkey to slow down a bit and take rest, regain your strength, because in the long term what we are seeing that if donkey works too hard, it will not be helpful for him in a long term. He will not sustain in a longer period, for a longer period. So in the context of heart failure, we have seen that the chronic stimulation of sympathetic system ultimately leads to cardiac remodeling. So there are certain beta blockers which are approved for the treatment of chronic stable heart failure. Now this word is important, as I was telling you, beta blockers should not be used in decompensated heart failure, because whatever sympathetic support that the heart is getting, you will cut it down. So beta blockers are basically used in compensated heart failure, or in stable heart failure, or in chronic stable heart failure. Carvedilol, bisoprolol, and long-acting metoprolol, these are the preferred beta blocker that are used in cases of heart failure. Now let us discuss the last class of drug, or the last category of drugs that increases the cardiac contractility, because this is where all the things are starting. Okay, so why not just increase the force of myocardial contraction or provide the positive inotropic effect, increase the emptying of the left ventricle, and ultimately why not increase the cardiac output. So this is what actually cardiac glycosides are doing. Cardiac glycosides basically increases the cardiac contractility. Again, this donkey analogy, how the cardiac glycosides or the drugs that increase contractility will help the donkey. It is like giving some incentive to donkey to work harder, but it is basically a false promise which will not help donkey in a long term. We are just giving the donkey some incentive to work harder. We are, in the context of heart failure, if we can compare, we are not halting the progression of the disease. We are just providing symptomatic relief to the patient. We are just increasing the myocardial contractility and the cardiac output. But one thing, as far as drugs such as cardiac glycosides are concerned, though they increases the myocardial contraction, but they do not lead to increase in oxygen consumption. The corresponding increase in oxygen consumption that should happen in consequence to the increased myocardial contractility is not happening with the cardiac glycosides, because apart from increasing the contraction of the heart, they also decreases the heart rate. That we will discuss just after a few minutes while we discuss the pharmacology of cardiac glycosides. So let us discuss in the last segment of this class about pharmacology of cardiac glycosides. As I have told you, cardiac glycosides are the drugs having the cardiac inotropic property. They basically increases the force of contraction and cardiac output, and that's why they improve the cardiac output, because they increase the myocardial contraction, but they do not lead to corresponding increase in the myocardial oxygen consumption that should have happened in consequence to the increased force of contraction, because they are also decreasing the heart rate. Because of all these effects, we call these drugs as cardiotonic drug. So broadly, if you see the mechanism of action of cardiac glycoside, that we will discuss just after a few minutes. They increase the contraction of the heart by inhibiting the sodium potassium ATPase pump. And this inhibition of sodium potassium ATPase basically increases the intracellular calcium, and this increased calcium actually increases the myocardial contraction. But the other thing that I am constantly telling you, that apart from increased force of contraction, it is also decreasing the heart rate. And how it is decreasing the heart rate? It increases the vagal tone, it blunts the sympathetic activation, increases the vagal tone, and that's why it slow down the conduction, prolong the AV refractory period. Now, we human beings were knowing about the effects of cardiac glycosides for a very longer period. For centuries, we were knowing about. But one physician, his name was William Withering. he he noticed one old lady, or we can say uh, that old lady was actually he was actually a local doctor sort of thing in her locality, wherein she was utilizing this extract of foxglove plant for treating the edema patients, or for treating the dropsy patient. So William Withering, he was very impressed by that lady, and then he came to know about this foxglove plant. And then what this gentleman started doing, he treated his own patients who were suffering from dropsy with this extract of the foxglove plant. And in 1785 he published his paper, his research paper, and he basically described the effects of this plant extract in a patients who were suffering from dropsy. And he basically demonstrated, though human beings were knowing about the therapeutic effects for many centuries earlier, but he was the first person or first physician who published it as a scientific finding, and he showed that this plant extract basically decreases the edema and slow down the heart rate. Nowadays, uh, the cardiac glycoside that we are using, digoxin, is actually derived from the Digitalis lanata plant, and the foxglove plant was being used for extracting Digitalis purpurea. And William Withering was so impressed with the use of or with the therapeutic benefits of cardiac glycosides, that he wrote that it has a power over the motion of the heart to a degree yet unobserved in any other medicine. Yes, it is very much true in today's context also. And till 1970s, cardiac glycosides were the first choice drug or first line drug for the treatment of heart failure. But over a period of time, we have come to know that it is just providing the symptomatic relief to the patient. It is not reducing, or it is not halting the progression of the disease. So it is not providing any mortality or morbidity benefit to the patient. Okay, it is in the context of donkey analogy, it is just giving the heart some incentive to work harder. As I have told you, the digoxin, which is nowadays very commonly used cardiac glycoside, or we can say the only cardiac glycoside that is being used, is actually derived from the plant Digitalis lanata. But cardiac glycosides, we have seen, are not only found naturally in plants, but it has also got animal source. Now, if you see the chemistry of cardiac glycoside broadly have two part as far as its chemical structure is concerned. It has got a glycone part, or we call it a genin part, and to it the sugar moiety is attached. So a glycone part is basically a steroid ring to which a lactone ring is attached at the 17th position. Now, why it is important for you to know about the chemical structure of cardiac glycosides? Because what we have noticed is that the A-glycone part is basically responsible for the pharmacodynamic activity of the cardiac glycoside, whereas the sugar residues or the sugar moiety is basically responsible for the pharmacokinetic property of the cardiac glycoside. Sugar moiety basically influences the solubility or the cell permeability of the cardiac glycosides. So what we have seen, we will discuss about mechanism of action just after a few minutes, but let us first discuss its pharmacological action first. Now what we have seen that cardiac glycoside basically they are increasing the myocardial contractility and the cardiac output in the hypodynamic heart, but it do not lead to corresponding increase in the oxygen consumption. So in a nutshell, this is what actually cardiac glycosides are doing. So it has got positive inotropic effect because of inhibition of this sodium potassium ATPase pump. So it is increasing the stroke volume, and because it is increasing the stroke volume, we have seen cardiac output is dependent upon stroke volume. So if you increase the stroke volume, you increase the cardiac output also. And also, apart from its positive inotropic effect, we have seen that it decreases the heart rate. And this decreased heart rate, what it will do, the heart will start spending more time in the diastole. The diastole will be prolonged. And what we have seen, if diastole is prolonged, more time is provided for the ventricular rest and for the ventricular filling. Okay. So it is basically prolonging the diastole and it is shortening the systole. So by these mechanisms, it is increasing the cardiac output. Now, what we have seen over and over again that the vicious cycle that the heart failure leads to, it is basically starting from reduced cardiac output. Okay, so by giving this cardiac glycoside, you are increasing the cardiac output. Okay, so if you are increasing the cardiac output, the compensatory mechanism that were activated in response to decreased cardiac output, they will be reduced or they will be halted to an extent. Yes. So if cardiac output is increased, they will decrease the background sympathetic activity. So if in consequence to the increased cardiac output, if the sympathetic activity is decreased, this decreased sympathetic activity, what it will do? It will decrease the heart rate, it will decrease the afterload. Then in consequence to increased cardiac output, because increased cardiac output will also increase the renal blood flow, and if renal blood flow will increase, the renin angiotensin aldosterone system that was activated, that will not get activated. So ultimately this reduced renin angiotensin aldosterone system activation will decrease the afterload, and it will also decrease the sodium and water retention and will decrease the preload. And this decreased preload will also decrease the edema, will decrease the ventricular end-diastolic volume, will decrease the capillary and venous pressure, and will relieve the congestion, and will ultimately improve the tissue perfusion and improve the circulation. And increased cardiac output will lead to decreased cardiac filling pressure and decreased ventricular volume, and the heart size will reduce. Now, let us discuss this in context of the Frank-Starling law. Okay, now we have discussed the relationship between stroke volume and in-diastolic volume. Stroke volume depends upon stroke volume determines the cardiac output. Now, in this graph, what you are noticing, if there are three curves, one for a normal heart, one for a heart which is failing, or the heart which has gone into heart failure, and the third curve or the middle curve is when you are giving cardiac glycoside to a patient who is suffering from the heart failure. Now, if you see in this curve, what is happening? If patient is in heart failure, the normal cardiac output curve will fall down because of the reduced cardiac output, and then what we have seen, heart will try to compensate for the reduced cardiac output. So the heart will go from point A to point B. So the curve will shift to the higher in-diastolic filling pressure, and according to the Frank-Starling law. Now, if you give that particular patient cardiac glycoside, because cardiac glycoside increase the contraction, the curve will shift from point B to point C, and then from C it will ultimately go to the point D, which happens because of the reduction in heart size that we are noticing with the use of cardiac glycoside, because of decreased preload secondary to improved cardiac performance. So, in nutshell, what we can see, that the cardiac glycosides, they are increasing the contraction of the heart, they are decreasing the in-diastolic and venous pressure, they are increasing the cardiac output, they are increasing the renal blood flow, they are decreasing the blood volume, they are decreasing the heart size, and they are also decreasing the heart rate. Now we have just a few more slides. In context of the electrophysiological actions of the heart, the cardiac glycoside decreases the conduction velocity of the AV node and Purkinje system and prolong the effective refractory period. It has got no prominent action on the blood pressure, and it has got no significant action on the coronary blood vessels. As far as the kidney is concerned, because of improved cardiac output, it increases the renal blood flow, and also it basically the compensatory mechanism of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, it is basically halting that. But in high doses, it can lead to nausea and vomiting because of stimulation of CTZ, and in toxic doses, it can lead to central sympathetic stimulation, and it can also lead to mental confusion, visual disturbances. Now, just in brief, I will tell you about the mechanism of action of cardiac glycosides. There are two important ion transport mechanisms that you need to understand. One is sodium potassium ATPase, and the another is sodium calcium exchanger. Now, what this sodium potassium ATPase does, it removes sodium from the cell in exchange for the potassium. And then we have the sodium calcium exchanger. It actually moves the calcium outwards for exchange for calcium to compensate for the removed sodium. Now, what actually this cardiac glycosides are doing, they are basically binding to the sodium potassium ATPase pump. And this binding of sodium potassium ATPase, what it will do, it will lead to inhibition of the sodium pump, leading to increased sodium. And this increased sodium, it will prevent the calcium extrusion, and it will also drive more calcium into the cell during depolarization through voltage sensitive calcium channel. And this excess calcium is taken up by the sarcoplasmic reticulum and ultimately leading to cardiac muscle contraction. Now let us understand this through one particular figure. This is what normally happening. Sodium is going out and potassium is coming in. Now, in consequence to that, calcium is going out and then sodium is coming in. Now, if you use cardiac glycosides, what will happen? Cardiac glycoside will inhibit sodium potassium ATPase pump, and it will lead to increased sodium, and this sodium calcium exchange will not happen. Because of that, calcium accumulation will happen, and also there will be more accumulation of calcium. And this increased calcium will actually increase the force of contraction of the heart. As far as adverse effects are concerned, cardiac glycosides have got very narrow therapeutic index, and it can lead to cardiac slowing and reduced rate of conduction. It can lead to sinus bradycardia, AV block, and it can also lead to ventricular arrhythmia. As far as the extracardiac adverse effects are concerned, the interesting thing is that the GIT adverse effects are the adverse effect that appears first in the patient. For example, the nausea, vomiting, and these happens because of the stimulation of the chemoreceptor trigger zone. Then the CNS effects can happen, manifesting as the blurred vision, headache, dizziness. As far as the electrolyte imbalances are concerned, digitalis actually competes for the potassium binding at the sodium potassium ATPase. So hypokalemia basically increases the toxicity of cardiac glycoside, whereas hyperkalemia decreases the toxicity, and also hypercalcemia increases the toxicity of toxin. So one drug which you have to be cautious while using digitalis is diuretic, such as loop diuretic, because loop diuretic, or for that matter thiazides, can lead to hypokalemia, and this hypokalemia can increase the risk of digitalis arrhythmias. And treatment of digitalis toxicity, you have to stop digitalis immediately. You can give potassium supplementation. Lignocan is effective against digitalis induced ventricular arrhythmia. So we have come to the conclusion of our class. Just to summarize, in the context of donkey analogy, what drug is doing what? Which drug is reducing the number of sacks on the wagon? Or which drug is reducing the preload? Mainly diuretics. Then which drug is limiting the speed of the cart? Beta blockers. Then which drug class is increasing the efficiency, or we can say which is decreasing both preload and afterload? Yeah, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, or vasodilators. Then which drug is basically giving incentive to the donkey to work hard? Cardiac glycoside. It is like putting the carrot in front of the donkey. Thank you.